B-A-R-B, B-A-R-B, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
50 plus so we've lived and learned.
Nothing can stop us now.
What respect that we all have earned.
Nothing can stop us now.
We're the ones who have built this land.
Nothing can stop us now.
Let's unite and we'll take a stand.
Nothing can stop us now.
Nothing can stop us now. Show the world that we're able and strong. Nothing can stop us now. Raise your voices and sing our song. B-A-R-B, bold, active, resourceful, proud. B-A-R-B, bold, active, resourceful, proud. Oh yeah.
Thanks for coming out. Glad to see a familiar face in the group here. We're hopefully going to touch on some subjects that are close to everybody's heart. We all have to enjoy food. We all want to have a healthy lifestyle. And this project aims to bring the two together so that we can find things in common and work towards a common goal in the sense of helping to provide some more agricultural produce in this country, which is in dire need of it. It's also skewed towards organic agriculture because we believe this is it's nothing new. It's the oldest form of agriculture, and you probably grew up with organic food as a part of your normal lifestyle. But we're trying to take people back there, bring out anything that has come out in the last 10 or 15 years that you might not be aware of. And I'm hoping that I will learn a lot from you as well. I'm very young in the game. I've only been at 20 years, so I've got a lot to do and a lot to learn. I want to start with a short video that was produced by some students from the ecology department of the UWI. So you can sit back as other people come in. We'll have time to go through this video. If there's anything in it that you note that you want to ask a question about, please make a note and ask it at the end of the video if you don't mind. Okay. Any questions to start with?
Nothing can stop us now.
We're the ones who have built this land.
Nothing can stop us now.
Let's unite and we'll take a stand.
Nothing can stop us now.
You can eat small amounts of it or drink small amounts of neem tea. It has medicinal value. But as in most cases, all medicines, all foods are poisoned at some level. You have to know how much to use. So, but the eggshells are generally used for things like snails and slugs. You can crush them up very fine and sprinkle them in the garden, and certain insects that will crawl won't want to crawl over them. But we will have a session on that as well.
We've got the might.
Nothing can stop us now.
We all believe in what's true and right.
Nothing can stop us now.
Come on, stand up and shout out loud.
Approaches to planting in limited space. How you go about thinking about the best use of your spaces. Now this is a typical, more or less what you call a backyard garden. The image might not be too clear, but you can see there are large trees, there are buildings in the area. They're the general things that you'll find around any household. Now this is the alternative here. This is open farming. But the objectives of this workshop is to prepare you all for organic management of your home garden units. Everybody may not have seen, was at Bullins last week. Did anybody not go to Bullins last week? Okay, so you have all the handouts, I believe, from the training session the Tuesday before. I think there's a session at Bullins this Thursday. What we're going to try to look at in this the permaculture approach to layout and planting. What does permaculture design include? The importance and aims of irrigation and water harvesting. And bed preparation, preparing your garden beds. Now this is a permaculture project that's going on currently in St. Andrew. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the sand quarry in St. Andrew. Where? The sand mine in St. Andrew, near St. Andrew Parish Church. No. Just around the corner there's a sand mine that's been in operation 50 years now. It's actually celebrating its anniversary with Barbados. And all the buildings you see in Barbados have had sand mined from this area. My family, my grandparents, everybody grew up in this area of St. Andrew, and there were huge dunes, sand dunes, that have been taken down to where you can see a pond now. They've gone down to the level where they're actually finding water. So the owner of the project decided he wants to turn the whole thing into a huge permaculture forest, to reforest the area, something similar to what it was like 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, it would have had in fat ports, cashews, sea grapes, coconut trees. So the mining has moved nearly all of that off the surface now. So rather than just leave it as a big gaping hole, the idea is to put permaculture principles into practice that would allow the land to regenerate, to restore that land back to something like what it was 50 or 60 years ago. These are a couple of the young ladies. This is a plant in here called sun hemp. Sun hemp. It's planted to help fix nitrogen into the soil and cover the ground. So part of what permaculture philosophy comes from a gentleman by the name of Bill Morrison. He was one of the first, an Australian man, one of the first people to design a permaculture system. And in his manual, he has a number of major points that underline what permaculture is about. One is to work with nature rather than against nature. A lot of conventional agriculture, a lot of development, in fact, doesn't take nature fully into account. And therefore, there's a chance that you'll clash with what's been created and what will always be sustainable. So work with nature rather than against it. This is the one that's a bit of an oxymoron, but the problem is the solution. Sometimes you might find an issue that you come up against and you'll go all around the world looking for the answer, but the answer might be right there within the issue, something that has to be looked at closely. Make the least change for the greatest effect. That means to do as little as you need to do in order to get the best out of it. Sometimes you might put yourself through a great deal of strain and stress and end up with a result that you could have got with a lot less stress if you perhaps sat down and thought about it for a couple of minutes more. The yield of a system, this is a general philosophy in permaculture, the yield of a system is unlimited. It's according to your design and your imagination. Everything in nature modifies its environment. Man is a good example. We were born into and created an environment which we've modified to suit our conditions now. So everything in nature modifies to some extent its environment. In looking at these things, and we can transfer that philosophy to the home gardening units. This is a big philosophy, but we can try to bring it down in size. When you're putting together your garden, observe the surroundings and replicate what's positive about your surroundings. There may be some plants that grow well in the shade, if you observe them. There may be an area in your garden where you'll find a lot of ants. And you'll try to find out why are the ants in that particular area of the garden? What about that area of the garden is attracting ants? So you look around your surroundings and try to find what is doing well, which plants are surviving without any pests. Perhaps that's a pest control plant. Perhaps that's a repellent. And you might take that plant and move it nearer to your garden then, because you can see, well, nothing seems to attack this particular plant. And that's some of the common sense approaches to problems. Look at what's already there and think, what's the easiest way to deal with this? Don't necessarily have to go and research all through Google and find out all the latest things. Sometimes it's just in front of your eyes. Within that, you try to conserve your level of energy. Use your energy effectively. I mean, perhaps you wouldn't try to bring water from the end of the garden up to the front where your beds are. Try to find ways to reduce your energy use and all the energy use around you. So if you're going to be perhaps using a pump and you can get a solar panel, a small solar panel to pump the water, look for the most efficient way to get that energy used in the most sustainable manner. Now, the yield of a system is unlimited, includes things that we might normally call waste. In permaculture, there is no real waste. In nature, nothing is wasted. Everything has a purpose and regenerates. So the output from your system isn't just what you might eat. There are things in your system which are also beneficial that can be replaced and put back into the system at a later stage. So the output isn't just necessarily the food that comes out of the soil. You're also going to have output in the sense of the exercise you're getting, the use of your mind for something else. All these are outputs that come from your farm, that come from the plot that you're going to work. And every microclimate, a microclimate is a small, dense area with a slightly different climate to that which might be around it in general. But what you're creating with these units is a microclimate. You're creating an area that might be slightly different to the surroundings because it's going to be controlled, it's going to be netted, it's going to be raised out of the soil. So you will create your own modification to that environment. So what you see here is what you'll be going through with your smaller units. So I think I did print a handout of these slides, so you may be able to get one of those, or you may have one already. So you can always go through it. Any questions at this point? Am I going too fast, too slow? You can all hear me clearly? Okay, sorry.
Would it be possible for us to get information on the solar panel?
Yes, please make a note of that, and at the end I'll take a note of that question. The location of your garden. Now, everyone's home is slightly different, everyone's garden is slightly different. You're going to have to take a personal look at where your garden is going to be set up. But major things to look for: most plants that need to fruit require at least 6 hours of sun, of reasonable sun. That's like tomatoes, peppers, that need to actually put a fruit out. So you need to find an area that you can get at least 6 hours of sun. Not everything needs that much sun. You can still grow a lot of crops without that much sun. But ideally, 6 hours of sun to cover most types of crops. So if you might look in your garden, you might have overhanging trees. It's a good idea to trim back those overlapping branches. You can find someone to help you with it. Take out the lower branches and leave the higher ones perhaps so you have dappled sunlight. You might not want to cut down your trees. Obviously the tree's going to keep the area a little cooler. But overhanging branches can be trimmed to let in more sunlight. Now you may already have an area in your garden which has lovely flowers, not hardly any pests, no damage from rain. So observe what you have in an area that's doing well and try to site your unit close to that area. If you don't have an area where you already have flowering plants, you can perhaps put some plants in the area where you decide to put your unit. The idea is that you attract beneficials to the area of your farm. Bees are beneficial. You might not always like a bee, but a bee does a lot of work in the garden. There's another animal you won't like, which is centipedes, but they also do a lot of work in the garden. They're very good for pulling and eating worms. Spiders do a lot of work. So your plants you already have there are doing well. Try and find a location near them that you can put your unit, so they get the benefit of that surrounding. A location close to the house is one of those things that helps to minimize your energy use. If your garden is going to be at the bottom of your garden, you have to walk 300 meters to it, and the rain might be falling or it might be a little bit dark, you might not be able to go and attend to something that needs tending. So if you can site the unit closer to your home, somewhere where you can take a few steps and you're there, or you can look at it from inside the house, that saves you a lot of energy and time. And if possible, you have a concrete path, and you can put your unit somewhere near that concrete path. After a while, what happens is the area around where you're going to be walking on grass is going to get saturated. If it's wet outside and you're walking in the area, you're going to start to mash down that grass. So you'll end up probably with a muddy area in the rain season at least. So if you have a path, and you can site it anywhere near a path, it's also easy for access if you have to bring in a wheelbarrow or any other tools. But if you don't have a path, you can use wood chips and surround your unit with a good thick layer of coarse wood chips. Anything that might take a year or two to break down. So that your walking area, which you're going to traverse most of the time, is going to stay fairly uniform and not get bogged out with water. So those are some of the considerations in locating your garden. Anybody have any questions on that slide? Because this is going to be an important part. Once your garden is in place, although you can move it, it's that energy use thing again. So selecting the right spot is going to be 70% of what's going to make your garden successful. Okay?
Does wood chips have plants?
There's a possibility, but you can use white line. There'll be other things that you can put on the wood chips to help reduce the pests that might come around. Even things like, I think, something like cinnamon powder. A lot of ants don't like to be anywhere near cinnamon. So cinnamon powder that you use in the kitchen, you can sprinkle that every so often around the area, and ants don't like that scent or having to deal with that.
Chips, you're talking the one that sells in the hardware, or you can get any type of wood chip?
You can get any type of wood chips. If you have an old tree around, or you have branches around, and you have a shredder, shred up your own. But make it fairly thick 3 to 4 inches thick, so that it would subdue the grass and the moisture would penetrate that and not stay on the surface. Okay, here are some approaches to planting in limited space. The image is of one of our organic farmers who has a big open field, but he still plants Chinese cabbage fairly close together. Point is that each plant needs its own space to grow well. But one of the considerations you might have to have is your own personal use of fruit and veg. It's important that you grow what you want to eat. Grow what you use most regularly, and match that back to what you can grow in that unit. So the first approach is to consider your personal and household and family needs in the garden. And leave space, if you can, to expand your garden. A part of the process of growing in small units is having a rotation, being able to rotate crops around. And you might find that one unit doesn't give you enough space for your household needs to rotate adequately. Therefore, you need to perhaps find an area where you can add another garden unit, perhaps. So think about that as well when you're approaching your planting. How much do I need in the house? How much do I need to plant more outside of this box, as well as what's going to be in the unit? Now, you place the unit. Now, this second one here, place the unit with the shortest end on the east-west axis, is because our sun rises in the east and goes down to the west. So you'll have a longer daylight shift if the unit is placed long ways to the sun. So if it's an 8x4 unit like this desk, and the sun rises on the east, it's best to have the unit facing the east-west axis. That way the whole box will get sun throughout the day. So then you can plant your taller plants on one side of the box so that the tall plants won't shade the smaller plants. So both will get adequate sun, equal sun all day around. If you have the other way around, the sun rose here and you have your taller plants on this side, for a few hours the tall plants are going to shade the smaller plants, the shorter crops. So they will get less adequate sunlight. So you kind of face your unit to suit how the sun will rise and how the sun will play out on your box, so everybody gets adequate and fair sunlight. You should try to avoid the large vine crops in these units. Obviously they're going to run all over the place. And they're not like spinach perhaps, where you can cut them back and use the spinach and keep them under control. Sometimes you might not get a flower for 6 feet on a pumpkin vine. So you've got 6 feet tangling up inside the unit. So you try to avoid those huge crops that would bring lots of vine, because they'll take over the whole unit in the end. Or quite early, in fact, not even at the end. A good consideration is to look at the low intensity, the low energy crops. Things that you don't have to keep planting every week. So if you harvest a lettuce today, you have to plant another lettuce tomorrow, or have one lined up to plant. But there are lettuce varieties which you can cut, what we call cut and come again. That means you can break off the leaf and they'll grow back. And they'll stay in the ground for 3-4 months. Once you look after them and mold the soil around them, you can keep cutting these crops and let them grow back up. And you have to go back into the box less to do planting. These are energy-saving areas. So arugula, which is what we call rocket. I'm sure everybody's familiar with kale, mustards. All these types of crops will keep growing for many months once you look after them. And you can just keep cutting them, harvesting, and letting them grow back again. So try to find crops that you can do that with. Things like sweet peppers, flavored peppers. Those plants will stand up for years. You can go out and harvest those and look after the plants, and you'll have crops for a long period of time. If you're going to think about lettuces necessarily, you have to replant all the time, regularly. You have a question?
Flavored peppers?
Flavored peppers. There's a pepper that we have some seasonal from Grenada, and they give you a small red pepper, but it's not hot. It just has a nice flavor. You can taste that it's pepper, but it's not a hot pepper. You should generally allow a minimum of 1 foot between plants. In the idea of square foot gardening, which is something that's mentioned within the curriculum, the idea is that every plant requires at least 1 foot if it's one plant, and if you're doing several smaller plants, you can get maybe 10 in that 12 square inches. The idea is that herbs can be planted more densely than things like lettuce or kale. So you can work out in your box when you're planting, can I have an area of my herbs which just takes up 12 inches? And maybe have 5 of those varieties of herbs in a dense area like that. Another trick with, I believe, with limited spaces is to maintain at least one marigold plant. And somebody said, who was that? Why do you have a marigold plant?
Keep it ready.
That's right. And it also helps with certain soil bacteria as well. So it's important to keep a marigold inside the unit. And legume variety. Legumes are beans, bean family. It's good to have a bean inside a unit because beans fix nitrogen into the soil. They suck nitrogen from the air and transfer it in their bodies and fix it in the ends of their roots into the soil. So they keep putting back nitrogen in the soil. So it's always good to keep a legume variety somewhere in your cropping system so that you'll be helping the soil without having to add things to the soil necessarily. It's another thing with that energy efficiency, using your energy rather than bringing in manure or bringing in anything. Plant crops that will put something back into the soil for you. So any type of bean, pea, peanuts, all these are legume crops. I'm going to go ahead. Any questions? You can feel free to ask. Now this is done at my farm. Some of the video on the other slides, on the other movie, was at my farm as well in St. Andrew. I farm in the Borden area of St. Andrew. So this is how we prepared a field, or part of a field. It was rotavated and then it was mulched. So planting open beds, our main challenge is weed control. Obviously everybody has pest issues, but pests and weeds are the biggest challenge in open field farming. Managing the weeds. Weeds can be blown in an open field from other grasses that have seeds, so that increases the amount of weeds you get. Birds can drop seeds, so you can get lots of weeds in open farming. One of the benefits, however, in planting open beds is greater biodiversity than protected agriculture. There's a greater availability of beneficial insects in the open field. Things like bees, certain other things like even centipedes. We have a huge variety of things that will interact with the crops. Some of them are very good, some of them are very useful and very beneficial to the soil and to the plants. Others, obviously, there's a balance in there that we have to try and find in open farming. In the open bed system, we can store water better than most people can store water. Because in permaculture, we've learned that the soil is actually a big reservoir. The soil holds water. So if you dig what we call swales or curved ditches along contour on slopes, the water will settle into the ditch and stay under the soil for longer. So the basin of land around your farm is actually a huge storage capacity for rain. So water will actually store in the soil. So we can have millions of gallons of water literally held back in the soil by a series of swales that slows water down and sinks it into the ground rather than letting it bounce on the surface 2 or 3 inches and then running off. So in open farming, we have an opportunity to store lots of water. And storage of water and use of water is going to be an issue with your units as well. Because we have just come out of a very dry season or two. So harvesting water is one of the things that you're going to have to try to really look at, especially in the dry season. Obviously, the best type of water to use is rainwater. Plants will respond much better to rainwater. Chlorinated water kills microbes in the soil. It probably helps to kill microbes in us too, in our stomachs. So it kills microbes in the soil as well. So rainwater would not do that. Rainwater would be more absorbed easily by the plants and will build the soil up. When you're collecting rainwater from a roof, add a net filter at least at one of the junctions where the downpipes come in, so you can filter out any debris that might fall on your roof. If you have leaves or anything going on top of your roof, you don't want it going down into your water storage. So just put a net filter in that junction where the water will start to go down, and every so often go back and clean it out. Otherwise you'll find it start overflowing, you'll have problems with collecting water, you'll get fed up with it, and you'll just go back to the tap when BWA would like that. So if you don't cover the area that you're going to store the water in, that's very important.
What sort of netting do you recommend?
You can use the same type of netting that might be used for mosquito netting on your house. Yeah, that type of netting, probably fine enough. Establish enough height on your water storage tank to use gravity flow to your garden. So gardens are going to be right down on the ground more or less. So if you have a storage tank that is maybe 3 feet higher than your garden, you will get that amount of gravity, even if it's on the ground. So the higher you bring it, the more flow you'll be able to get from the gravity. So that might mean having something on a stand. It could be a 55-gallon drum with a small tap on it. You can then add a hose to it and run that hose to your drip irrigation. It doesn't have to be a huge tank, but it's better to have some rainwater in your system than none at all.
Nothing can stop us now. Raise your voices and sing our song. BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
You're going to have rainwater actually wetting your plants as well. So, you know, collect what you can. When it's raining, you don't have to worry about wetting so much. You'll have water on your plants anyway. Some people may have a pond in their garden or think about putting in a pond. In the permaculture design system, we put ponds at the highest points, more so than the lowest points, so that you can transfer that collection of water to lower areas, rather than using energy to pump water back up. The permaculture philosophy is store water at the highest point you can at first, and you can always then gravity feed anything below that needs it. Whereas if you store it at the bottom, you have to find some system to get it back up to the areas that might want it. So if you have a pond and it has an overflow pipe, and it's slightly higher area than your garden's going to be, you can use that overflow pipe to fill up tanks closer to the garden beds again, so that you can find a way to use the resources without having to put too much energy into it. Water from aquariums. Now it depends in some extent to what you feed your fish. But generally fish waste is excellent fertilizer for plants. It's very good for the soil. And sometimes you might have an aquarium that you're going to clean out every so often. Add that water to your storage. So the micronutrients that are in the fish waste will be added as beneficials to your fertilizer regime in your garden. So think of other things around your home that might collect water on a natural basis, and the water has to be clean enough for human use or for animal use, and find ways to store some of that water. Of course, as the point was mentioned, you must make sure you cover these things. The same netting I mentioned to you, the mosquito net, is excellent for covering any kind of plant. You can buy that netting on strips as long as you want from Carter's or anywhere like that. So this is at the project, these tanks where we catch water in St Andrew for the sand mine project. We set up those tanks, there's 12 of them, 1,000-gallon tanks, and there's one big long roof, about 120 feet long. So all that roof is connected to these tanks, and these upright things are overflow systems whereby the water that's coming off the roof, if it's not clean, it first goes into this overhanging pipe, comes down here, and as it builds back up, it goes into here. So all the debris stays in the bottom, and you can just open a valve and let out all the dirty water or the bush or whatever might be caught up in the pipe. So you don't get anything bad going back into the tank.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
50 plus so we've lived and learned.
Nothing can stop us.
You can't understate the importance of using water and using water adequately. You can use too much water, it doesn't benefit you. So the thing about using water is how much do your plants need, how much water do they need? And this will vary depending on the type of soil even under your unit. Because the soil under your unit, if it's clear, it's going to hold water longer than any other type of soil. So you might find your clear base under there is going to adequately supply the first 3 or 4 inches of soil that's in your garden. So you have to kind of consider what stage of growth the plants are in. Generally speaking, younger plants need a little more water than older plants. As a plant starts to mature, it doesn't need quite as much liquids. The types of plants you're using, some plants will want more water than others. I've grown hot peppers, and they managed to survive right through the last dry season without a drop of water other than whatever rain fell or whatever dew fell. Obviously I mulched them heavily so that any dew that did fall would still keep a certain level of moisture. But peppers is one thing, aloes, certain crops you don't need to water them very often. Even things like pineapple, which is a good plant to put in at those units actually. They're a long-term plant, a pineapple, but they're of high value and they don't need much irrigation. Leafy veg like kale, rocket, they require more consistent weathering throughout the stages of growth because they're regenerating all the time. So they're going to need to keep getting wet and that area stay moist. Some things that will impact on your water is sun and wind. People think that sun is the biggest dryer out of the soil, but actually it's the wind. The wind dries out the soil faster than the sun does. So if it's a very windy day, the topsoil can become very dry just because of the wind. A way to make the most of your irrigation is to retain a high level of humus in the soil. That's material that's broken down, like grass trimmings, leaves, to keep the soil from bunging up, from tightening up, and mulch on the surface of the garden to cover the garden. If you don't cover the garden, several things will happen, obviously. Anybody can tell me one of the things that happens if you don't use mulch? It can clog together, very good point. Weeds will grow a little faster, that's another good one. The soil will dry out, it overheats eventually. So there's several good reasons to consider mulch.
Nothing can stop us now.
We're both activists full proud.
Nothing can stop us now.
Nothing can stop us now. Show the world that we're able and strong.
Preparing your beds. That was me about 10 years ago, preparing some beds. Still got that hole. Okay. It's on, that's not 5 acres, but it's in the background. They don't do all by hand, you use machines as well, but that was just in the short term. Cardboard, different ways you can try to prepare your beds. You can use cardboard to help reduce the growth of weeds. You cover the area underneath your raised bed. So I don't know when you guys kind of put down their units. If you had cardboard there at home, you could lay out that whole area. They're going to put the soil down with some cardboard first. This will help to suppress the regular cartons, box cartons. Keep as many of them as you can at home and cover the whole area that they're going to put the soil down on with cardboard. It will suppress the weeds from growing through, and it will break down and also help to add to your soil. A lot of cardboard is recyclable cardboard, so look for that one that says recyclable cardboard. It probably means it doesn't have any deadly chemicals in it. So just cover that on an overlap at the base of your garden when they come to install it, and have that ready for them. In preparing your garden, a lightweight handled garden fork should be adequate. You know, you have these, they look kind of cheap, but they're garden forks, and you can reach out fairly far with them. So get one with as long a handle as possible so you don't have to be bending over. The hardest part of the work in agriculture is often the bending. Some of the benefits of what you're doing, of the raised bed system and protected gardening. Because what you're doing is protected agriculture. You're protecting your crops from certain things. So pest control, pest exclusion, is a major benefit. You'll have far less pests than I might have on my open farm. You'll see, hopefully your plants will thrive a lot longer, and that's a great benefit. You'll have less weeds to control because you won't have that wind blowing dry seeds into your units necessarily if you keep them fairly well closed and managed. So your weeding should be much easier to control. You'll be able to do more intensive planting in the smaller areas that you'll be occupying. So you can get in a density of crops that should hopefully be of benefit to your house initially, for your homes and your families. These units are suited to small spaces. If I was perhaps going to use a unit that size, I have a unit that I use at home which is a similar size for seedlings, which just raise seedlings in. But it's not in the soil, we have it raised on a netting. But it's of a similar size. So you could perhaps build another one for your own seedlings or something half the size. And they're easy to put together. And they're easily manageable for people with physical challenges. So if you have arthritis or you have any disability that might restrict you, these type of gardening systems work really well. We did a similar size unit system for people with disabilities, which few people here would know about. And it was a very successful project in the sense that we put together seedling nurseries, just a little bigger than these tables, water catchments at their homes. And we gave the people seedling trays, and some were blind, some were in wheelchairs, some were deaf. And the idea was that they would hatch the seedlings for our farmers at their homes. And nearly everybody said that it worked well in the sense that they made a small income every week, which they weren't doing before. They could work at home. And it was therapeutic. The families came together more to help each other. And the people that were visually impaired did the best seedlings. The people that were blind actually produced the best and healthiest looking seedlings. Yeah, they really did well. So units that are of a manageable size can suit a whole family. Even the youngest can come out there and help, or the very elderly can come and help. The challenges that you might face is the ideal placement in your existing garden. You don't want to chop apart your existing garden and destroy everything that's already nice in it. So finding that space that's going to be suitable is maybe a challenge for some people. The units have a tendency over a period of time, unless you really treat them well, to compact as the soil starts to get bound down. So every so often you might have to reinvigorate the soil. You might have to take a certain amount of soil out, or add more humus, or add more compost, because it's not obviously going to be soaked. It's not going to dissipate into the earth as such. It's going to be in that one container for a period of time.
So when you say a period of time, like how many weeks or months before compaction starts to occur?
Well, if you walk through your system at all, it's going to compact within weeks. But if you leave it and you fork it and you add humus regularly, it could last for years. It could last for years. And change your crops around as well. Move your crops around every so often. Effective irrigation. I was thinking about the irrigation for a unit like this the other day, and I can see it may be challenging because the varieties of crops you might have in a unit may not suit one type of irrigation. Some crops may not need that much water, but if you have just one system set up and you just turn it on and off, or it's turned on and off automatically, you may be challenged to overwet some things and underwet other things. So you might have to find a system where you can break down the irrigation with stop valves so that you can wet portions that might need twice a day, whilst not wetting another portion that might only need twice a week. So that you don't do, because one cap doesn't fit every head. So you have to find a way to make sure your irrigation suits the variety of crops that you bring in. And sometimes it might be just as well to irrigate with a watering can. Just get a watering can and wet an area that doesn't need the drip. The other challenge is the exclusion. Because of this very same thing that is the problem is the solution. There's a problem with there's a solution with the pest exclusion because you're going to have the net, so you'll exclude the pests. But that also creates a slight challenge in that there are beneficial insects that can help you work the garden that might not necessarily get in. So you might have to have an open door policy. Every so often open the door. Call them in. Check their membership number and then shut it back down because you don't want the pests to come in when you open the door. So observation again, making sure you see what might be affecting outside your garden, and if you find you've got something like mealybug on some of your plants, some of your flowering plants, don't open up your net until you've taken care of those mealybugs. You don't want the people coming in that you don't want in your house. So exclusion of beneficial insects like bees. Bees do an important job. And unless you have a little beehive in the corner, you're going to find that you might have to hand pollinate certain things. That means shake them. You might have to see if you can find a way to encourage. That's why it's good to put them near gardens that already exist, because the wasps that will take care of those gardens, you can open up every so often and let a wasp in, keep them in there for a week or two, and then let them go again. But pollination is one of the major challenges in protected agriculture, making sure you get adequate pollination. Some crops nowadays are self-pollinating, so it isn't always a problem. And some crops like cabbages and lettuce, the brassicas don't need pollination. So if your garden is mainly made up of brassicas and lettuces, that wouldn't be really an issue. What forms of weed control do you think you would use in your raised bed unit? What challenges do you think a person with physical disabilities might face working with one of these units? We want to make the units really accessible to as many people as possible. So if you can think of what challenges a person that might have a limited use of, that they might face with a unit like this, and what can be done to make that unit more adaptable if that's the case. And think about the crops that you're going to plant in your square foot model, and how intense you're going to have those plants. Now you consider those couple of issues, like keep them in your head. What do you think you're going to need to plant in your unit? What can you do to make sure you get the benefits of the beneficials? How would you control weeds? And what can be done to make that unit even more accessible than it currently is for people that might have physical challenges? Any final questions before the break? Did everybody understand everything that was shown in different slides? Is there anything that you'd like to me to go over again?
Is there anywhere we can go where we can see plants that need roughly the same amount of watering? I'm just thinking in terms of planning our units.
I think Bullins will probably be able to give us some advice on that. It's a very long time established nursery, and they would have a watering system that will suit a wide range of things. So the practical on Thursday is a question you could ask there. All right. Yeah, everybody good with this?
Thank you very much.
How do you prepare the neem? We're going to have a program on that, but basically it's like making a cup of tea. It's a pesticide tea, really. You're actually going to steep it. Some people chop it up, but generally steeping it and drawing it out in warm water and leaving it for a period of days so you get some more absorbent. But you must use it up in a period of time as well, otherwise it starts to change from one substance to another. So the shelf life in the bare raw sense isn't very long.
You spoke of compost or humus. What did you make of this?
Compost is really the finished product of humus. So material that is breaking down to some extent is considered humus or can break down. So it could be dry leaves that haven't been composted. They will create humus eventually. So it's any material that is compostable, really, would be humus. So everybody good? Thank you for your time. I appreciate the effort.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud. BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
With a protected gardening system, there are going to be some beneficial pests that might not get into the units that you're going to use for the protected agriculture. All pests aren't necessarily bad, and you want to exclude the bad pests, but you don't want to exclude the good ones, the beneficials. So the challenge is finding a way to include beneficials into your system without necessarily letting the pests take over. So one way to do that is to open up the unit every so often to allow beneficial insects in, based on your observation of what's going on around the unit.
Proud, BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud. We're bold, we're active, resourceful, and proud. Can't stop, we're bold.
In open farming, controlling weeds is difficult because weeds will be blown into your field. A benefit of having protected agriculture is you have less weed to manage in the first place. But the way you do manage it is to use a lot of mulch to cover the soil adequately so that the mulch suppresses the weed growth. That generally is the best way to keep down weeds inside protected agricultural units.
How much would you need to cover it normally?
Between 2 to 4 inches of mulch, 2 to 4 inches deep of mulch cover should be adequate for at least 6 months before it breaks down.
Nothing can stop us now.
Let's unite and we'll take a stand.
Nothing can stop us now.
Nothing can stop us now. Show the world that we.
What are the benefits in terms of intensive planning and square foot models? And what are some of the challenges?
Some of the benefits is making the most prolific use of space that you have. Square foot gardening means more or less just that, taking every square foot and maximizing the production in that area. That's really beneficial for people who only have a small area to farm in and they want to make the most of that area. There are no real challenges to square foot gardening because the closeness of plants is limited by a certain amount of space anyway. So once you don't overdo that, you will get good crops out of square foot gardening.
Show the world that we're able and strong. Nothing can stop us now. Raise your voices and sing our song. BARP, bold, active, resourceful.
Locating the area in your garden for your existing garden to add an agricultural plot, that can be sometimes a challenge and needs to be really carefully thought out about where you're going to put that garden if you're going to do a raised bed garden inside an existing area. So trimming trees, making sure you're having adequate sunlight, a place to collect irrigation water, probably rainwater. You have to take all those things into consideration. And I think that's very important for anybody thinking about setting up a gardening unit at home.
BARP, bold, active, resourceful, proud.
50 plus, so we've lived and
Well, this project, as it's called, the Better Life Gardening Project, I think it's very worthwhile because there's generations of people who have been brought up into agriculture and they go away from it when they leave the island perhaps, or they get into other jobs. But finding people that are now willing to come back into agriculture or whatever scale is really beneficial. They'll have grandchildren or they'll have younger people who will be influenced now by what they see them doing and the way that gardening makes you feel. So hopefully that would be one of the benefits of being involved in this project.
Shout out loud.
Nothing can stop us now.
We're bold activists, full